being sort of suspicious and secretive around labor and birth unless you're trying to shuffle out a surrogate.
For a family that built its image on openness and compassion, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have never looked more guarded. Because when you peel back the polished photos and the carefully worded statements, you find a puzzle with too many missing pieces, and a birth story that refuses to stay buried.
Make it look like Meghan gave birth and you're trying to be weird about this, then it's going to make people think there's something weird going on.
This is the saga of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, a baby whose arrival should have been a celebration, but instead cracked open a vault of questions no one at the palace ever wanted to answer. And it all begins with a simple question. Where was Meghan on the day Archie was supposedly born? People who watched this unfold back in May 2019 remember the confusion. One minute, reporters were told Meghan had gone into labor in the early hours of the morning. Hours later, the palace announced that Archie had already arrived. It was the first odd twist in a timeline that never quite lined up. Portland Hospital, the private facility where Meghan claimed she delivered, something was off. Former staff members now say May 6, 2019 wasn't the frenzy you'd expect when a royal baby comes into the world. No road closures, no VIP convoys, no surge of uniformed security pacing the corridors. Just an ordinary Monday in London. It didn't match the script, not the script the royal family had followed for generations. Every Windsor birth before this had been a public ritual. Guarded wings of hospitals, official statements issued on schedule, senior royals arriving to pay respects, and the unspoken understanding that the public had a right to witness history as it happened. But Archie's arrival felt different, secretive, almost theatrical. When Harry stepped in front of the cameras that afternoon to confirm the birth, he was beaming. But behind the smile, even veteran royal correspondents could sense a tension, as though he was delivering lines from a play rather than simply sharing joy. Then came the photo call. 2 days later, Meghan emerged, baby in arms, and everything about the scene felt staged. The way the infant was wrapped, swaddled so tightly you couldn't glimpse a single feature. The way Meghan's face looked untouched by exhaustion. Her body language crisp and poised rather than the slightly dazed softness every new mother knows. Some viewers took it at face value, others raised an eyebrow. And slowly, piece by piece, the conspiracy theories began to grow. One theory, dismissed by the mainstream press but impossible to fully erase, claimed Meghan had used a surrogate and orchestrated an elaborate charade to appear as though she'd carried the pregnancy herself. In the months that followed, evidence both flimsy and intriguing began to trickle out. Observers started scrutinizing Meghan's maternity photos with a microscope. In one now infamous clip, her baby bump appeared to shift unnaturally as she crouched to pick something up. The video went viral and the phrase "moon bump" exploded across social media. To skeptics, it was proof that her pregnancy was a costume. To supporters, it was a cruel joke targeting a woman already hounded by the press. But even if you ignore the bump debates, other details refused to fade quietly. The birth certificate, for instance. In most royal births, both parents sign the document in person. Yet when Archie's certificate was finally released, Meghan's signature was conspicuously absent. Instead, palace aides filed it days later. When asked why, the explanation shifted more than once. Initially, officials claimed it was an administrative error. Then a spokesperson insisted the name change, replacing Rachel Meghan with Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, was dictated by Buckingham Palace itself. Purely bureaucratic adjustment. But critics couldn't help noticing the pattern. A milestone moment wrapped in layers of revision and afterthought. And then there was the Queen's reaction, or rather, her apparent lack of knowledge. According to multiple insiders, the monarch wasn't briefed on Meghan's hospital choice, the timing of the birth, or the couple's plan to withhold details. Instead, she learned about Archie's arrival the same way the rest of the world did, from a carefully worded public statement. If that sounds hard to believe, consider this. In all previous royal births, the sovereign was among the first to be informed. Tradition dictated it. Respect demanded it. To bypass the Queen was, in some courtiers' eyes, more than a break with protocol. It was a declaration of independence. And that declaration came with consequences. Within the palace walls, whispers began to swirl that Meghan and Harry were rewriting the rules to suit their agenda. Not just about privacy, but about control of their image, their narrative, and perhaps the very legitimacy of their child's claim to royal status. In a family where appearances have always been life or death currency, the optics were disastrous. But even as doubts simmered, the Sussexes pressed forward. They presented Archie to the public in Windsor Castle's St. George's Hall. A deliberate nod to tradition, though the atmosphere felt oddly hollow. Press pack was minimal, questions were few, and Meghan spoke only briefly, her voice smooth but guarded. Nothing about that day settled the rumors. If anything, the minimal exposure only fueled them. And behind the scenes, the couple's insistence on total secrecy was leaving longtime staff reeling. Reports later emerged that employees at Frogmore Cottage were issued non-disclosure agreements so restrictive they couldn't even confirm whether Meghan was in residence. Certain wings of the estate were locked down entirely. Senior aides, people who had served the crown for decades, were blocked from accessing basic information about her condition or plans. It wasn't the first time royal staff had been sworn to discretion, but according to several who have since spoken anonymously, the environment in the Sussex household felt uniquely tense. One former protection officer described it this way: "Usually you have protocols, you have timelines, you have a shared understanding that this is a historic occasion. With Meghan, there was none of that. Just a sense that if you asked the wrong question, your job might vanish." And so, as the days turned to weeks, the Sussexes retreated further into their private bubble. In their telling, it was a necessary defense against an intrusive press and a judgmental public. But to outsiders, even sympathetic ones, the secrecy became indistinguishable from suspicion. For every plausible explanation, another detail emerged that didn't quite fit. Why, for instance, did no credible witness report seeing Meghan's security convoy on May 6, despite the fact that all royal births required detailed transport logs? Why were no Portland hospital staff ever quoted on record describing the day a royal baby was delivered? Why did the timeline of labor and birth shift in official statements? And why, when the Queen herself had spent her life upholding royal traditions, was she left to learn about her great-grandson's arrival secondhand? These were the questions no one could answer without stumbling into contradiction. As time passed, the narrative only splintered further. In 2020, when Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, some assumed the tensions would ease. Couple would be free to live privately, and the institution could move on. But instead, the scrutiny deepened. Because when you declare independence from the system that protected you, and then make your fortune selling your side of the story, you invite even harsher examination. And for all their talk of transparency, the Sussexes remained tight-lipped about those first days of Archie's life. In interviews, Harry has described his son's birth as the happiest moment of his life. Meghan has spoken of feeling empowered to do things her way. But the simplest details, where, when, how, have never been recounted in full. And with each passing year, the vacuum of information has been filled with speculation. One of the most persistent theories is that Meghan used a surrogate but felt she had no choice but to maintain the appearance of a traditional pregnancy to protect Archie's place in the line of succession. It's a theory both shocking and, some would say, insulting. Yet the fact that it refuses to die is testament to how carefully the Sussexes controlled the narrative, and how much they left unsaid. When you hide the facts, you invite people to fill in the blanks. And once the internet starts connecting dots, the story takes on a life of its own. Consider the moon bump video, still racking up views years later, or the anonymous testimonies now circulating in tabloid columns, claiming hospital records were altered or never created, or the unconfirmed reports that as of 2024, staff at Portland Hospital have been quietly sharing details of that day, details that contradict the official timeline. So far, no credible outlet has published definitive proof, but that hasn't stopped the rumors from spreading, and each new whisper chips away at the Sussexes' carefully cultivated brand. 'Cause this isn't just a question of when a baby was born, it's a question of whether the most public couple on earth told the truth about the most private moment of their lives. And if they didn't, if even part of the official story was a fabrication, then everything that came after is suddenly open to doubt. The Netflix specials, the podcast deals, the speeches about authenticity, what do they mean if the origin story is built on a lie? It's a question that haunts their supporters and delights their critics. And as more documents leak, more insiders break ranks, and more timelines unravel, it becomes harder to simply dismiss the theories as baseless conspiracies. At a certain point, secrecy stops looking like privacy and starts looking like a cover-up. And for Meghan and Harry, that point may have arrived. Because in the end, this isn't just about one birth certificate or one day at a London hospital. It's about trust. Trust in a family that demands loyalty while trading an image. trust in a couple who say they want transparency but refuse to offer it, and trust in the idea that the royal story, even when modernized, still has some shred of integrity left. If you strip all that away, what remains is just a brand built on curated vulnerability and selective honesty. And when the foundation of that brand cracks, the consequences are impossible to contain. The story of Archie's birth may never be fully settled, but one thing is clear. The truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how many layers of secrecy try to smother it. And as the world keeps asking the same questions, the Sussexes must decide whether to keep hiding behind the curtain, or finally step into the light. 'Cause until they do, the speculation will only grow, and the legend of the hidden birth will never die. But if we're being honest, the strangest thing about this entire saga isn't the timeline, the birth certificate, or the lockdown at Frogmore Cottage. It's the way the palace, an institution famous for micromanaging every scrap of public perception, just let the confusion spiral out of control. Think about it. The royal family survived decades of scandal by controlling the narrative before it could mutate. When Charles and Diana's marriage began to crack, Buckingham Palace issued carefully worded statements to soften the blow. When Prince Andrew's connections to Jeffrey Epstein came under scrutiny, they scrambled to manage the fallout. Yet when it came to Archie's birth, there was no counteroffensive, no attempt to restore clarity. Instead, the silence from the Queen's courtiers almost felt strategic, as if they were content to watch Harry and Meghan flounder under the weight of their own contradictions. Some believe that was exactly the plan. According to a few seasoned royal watchers, the Queen's advisors viewed Meghan's approach, her insistence on total privacy, as an unforgivable breach of trust. And rather than help her plug the leaks, they stepped back and let public opinion do the damage. It's a theory that sounds almost too Machiavellian to be true. But in the world of royalty, where every smile and frown is choreographed, plausible deniability is an art form. One palace insider, who has never gone on record but has been quoted in multiple reputable publications, put it this way: they didn't have to sabotage her. All they had to do was nothing. And eventually, her own decisions would look like sabotage. It's a chilling thought, because if the institution quietly decided to let Meghan's credibility collapse under the weight of unanswered questions, it means Archie's birth became collateral damage in a battle for control. And that's the part no one wants to say out loud. Because once you acknowledge that possibility, that the palace might have used a baby's birth as leverage, you can't unsee it. You start wondering how much of what we call royal tradition is really just a sophisticated exercise in narrative warfare. And you start realizing that Meghan and Harry weren't just trying to protect their family from tabloid vultures. They were trying to escape an entire system that treated their personal milestones as public property. Yet the more they tried to keep the world out, the more the world insisted on seeing every detail. The irony is almost poetic. By refusing to share the full story, they fed the very curiosity they claimed to despise. And with every contradiction, every revised statement, every leaked memo, the story grew more tangled. Consider, for example, the claim that Meghan's hospital team included only private doctors. First glance, it sounds like an empowered woman making her own choices, a modern mother rejecting outdated expectations. But in the context of royal protocol, it's seismic. Because every royal birth since Queen Elizabeth's reign began has been overseen by the Queen's own trusted gynecologists. Not because the women lacked agency, but because the stakes were so high. A royal baby isn't just a child. He or she is a living symbol of continuity, legitimacy, and dynastic survival. That's why the births are so carefully witnessed, documented, and verified. And that's why Meghan's decision to sidestep the Queen's medical team sent shockwaves through palace corridors. Was it simply a personal choice? Or was it a deliberate attempt to remove any official record of what really happened? No one can say for sure, and that's precisely the problem. 'Cause when you leave questions unanswered, people will invent their own answers. Sometimes those answers are harmless gossip. Other times they become viral conspiracy theories with millions of believers. And in this case, the moon bump speculation didn't stay confined to obscure blogs. Crossed over into mainstream culture, spawning YouTube documentaries, Reddit megathreads, and tabloid exposes. If you search Meghan's name today, some of the most viewed results are videos dissecting every angle of her pregnancy, pausing footage frame by frame to analyze how her belly moved. comparing the shape of her bump to the photos taken weeks apart, studying her posture, her outfits, her expressions. It's a level of scrutiny no other royal woman has faced. Even Diana, hounded as she was never accused of faking her pregnancies. Yet Meghan became the first. And the fact that so many people found the theory plausible speaks to how poorly the palace handled the optics. Because whether you believe the theory or not, you have to admit, something about the way the Sussexes managed those 9 months felt off. Too controlled, too rehearsed, too perfect. And perfection, ironically, is what made it all seem so fake. Real life is messy. Babies arrive early or late. Mothers look exhausted. Timelines rarely line up neatly. But in Meghan's story, the edges were too smooth, and the gaps between facts too wide. And that's how a rumor metastasizes into something bigger, into a narrative that no amount of PR can fully erase. Even now, years later, the question still floats around every royal discussion. Where was Meghan on May 6, 2019? If you ask her supporters, the answer is obvious. She was exactly where she said she was, in a hospital room, surrounded by her chosen doctors, delivering her first child in peace. But if you ask the skeptics, you'll get a very different story. They'll tell you she was elsewhere, shielded from prying eyes, executing a plan she'd crafted long before labor ever began. A plan to protect her privacy or to protect a secret, depending on whom you believe. And the reason this debate has never been resolved is simple. There are just enough holes in the official story to keep the doubt alive. Take the transportation logs, for instance. Every royal birth requires a meticulously documented transfer from residence to hospital. Drivers, security escorts, decoy vehicles, all logged and verified. Yet no document has ever been released confirming how Meghan arrived at Portland Hospital. No eyewitness has stepped forward describing the motorcade. No staffer has recounted clearing the corridors. It's possible those records exist but were kept confidential. It's also possible they were never created. And that ambiguity is the oxygen that keeps the fire burning. Because for a royal event of this magnitude, the absence of documentation is almost as suspicious as a forged document would be. You can dismiss one odd detail as coincidence, two as bad luck. But when you stack them all together, the delayed announcement, the moon bump footage, the sealed records, the unsigned certificate, the result feels less like a series of accidents and more like a deliberate strategy. A strategy designed to protect something the public wasn't meant to see. And if you think that sounds outlandish, remember this. The same palace that claims total transparency also spent decades hiding the darkest secrets of its most senior members. From Diana's unhappiness to Prince Andrew's scandals, the royal family has always operated under the doctrine of selective disclosure. Reveal only what is convenient, deny everything else. So when Harry and Meghan adopted that same playbook, they weren't breaking tradition. They were following it to the letter. The only difference was that this time the cover story didn't hold. And as more time passes, more insiders retire, more NDAs expire, the possibility of the full truth emerging grows stronger. Already we've seen hints of it. Former protection officers quietly telling reporters that no security escort was assigned to Meghan on the day of Archie's birth. Anonymous staffers leaking internal memos that contradict the palace timeline. And tabloid reporters publishing excerpts from hospital logs that, if authentic, suggest no VIP measures were enacted at Portland Hospital on May 6. Are these leaks definitive proof of a cover-up? No, but they are smoke signals. And where there is smoke, there is usually fire. Question is how big the fire really is, and how far the flames will spread if someone finally steps forward with irrefutable evidence. Because if even part of the conspiracy theories are true, if the birth of a royal baby was staged, misrepresented, or manipulated, the fallout would be catastrophic. Not just for Meghan and Harry, but for the monarchy itself. For centuries, the legitimacy of royal bloodlines has rested on public trust in the process. The idea that every heir was born according to protocol, witnessed and verified by the crown. If that trust collapses, the repercussions could echo for generations. Suddenly, every birth certificate, every succession claim, every royal milestone becomes suspect, and the institution, already battered by scandal, loses the last shred of credibility it has left. That's why the stakes are so high, and why, even years later, this story refuses to die. Because at its heart, it's about something bigger than one couple's quest for privacy. It's about the collision between tradition and modernity, between public duty and personal autonomy, between the mythology of royalty and the reality that sometimes even the most powerful families have something to hide. In the end, maybe Meghan and Harry believed they were protecting their child from a world too cruel to respect boundaries. Or maybe they were protecting themselves from scrutiny they knew they couldn't withstand. Whichever it was, their decision to obscure the facts set in motion a chain reaction they can no longer control. And as more pieces of the puzzle surface, slowly, reluctantly, the picture grows clearer. Picture of a birth that was never as simple as the press releases claimed. Picture of a family who learned too late that in the age of the internet, no secret stays buried forever. And a picture of a monarchy that may never regain the trust it lost the moment the truth became negotiable. Questions will keep coming. Theories will keep multiplying. And the longer Meghan and Harry refuse to fill in the blanks, the more the blanks will define their legacy.